Chapter 9. Lyrazel blows away. Seasons turned quietly over Earl. Summer came and warmed the hills. The fields ripened gold under long, slow suns. And then the days began to shrink again. The sun, once climbing north, had begun its slow retreat southward. The skies cooled. The swallows gathered on the eaves, restless and ready for flight, just like something within Lyrazel's heart. But Lyrazel had not changed. She had stayed silent beneath the stars, never again kneeling by the pool, never again whispering thanks to their reflected light. Yet she still couldn't understand, not truly, why her feelings had to be hidden, why love for something as grand as the stars should be kept locked away inside her. She hadn't learned the ways of the people of Earl, not the quiet rules, not the unspoken customs, not the subtle expectations that wrapped around every gesture like invisible chains. And Alveric, though he watched her with love and growing confusion, did not see what was coming. He did not realize that it wouldn't be a great fight or some grand betrayal that would break the bond between them. It would be something small, something simple, something that would one day slip between them like a breath of wind and carry her away forever. One day, still holding on to hope, Alveric took Lyrazel to the Freer's house, a quiet place filled with sacred silence and symbols that had long guided the people of Earl. He wanted her to learn how to worship what he called holy. The Freer welcomed them warmly. He brought out the objects with a sense of ritual, like treasures passed down through time, a candle that cast a soft glow, a brass eagle that proudly held up the ancient book he read from, a tiny bowl of perfumed water made of polished brass, and silver snuffers meant to gently put out the flame. Each piece seemed ordinary, yet deeply important, as though it whispered stories from generations past. With a calm voice and patient smile, the Freer explained everything again, just as he had done before. The meanings behind each item, why the bowl was brass, why the snuffers were silver, what the symbols carved into the metal stood for, and what mystery they represented. His words were clear, thoughtful, and spoken with the respectful kindness of a teacher. And yet, something in his voice felt far away. Lyrazel heard the distance in it, a softness that did not reach her. He spoke to her like someone standing safely on the shore, calling out to a mermaid lost at sea. His words were meant to help her find the land, but they didn't know how deep the water really was. And Lyrazel, though she listened, felt it. She didn't belong on that shore. As they walked back toward the castle, the sky had begun to shift. The golden hush of evening wrapping the towers in soft light. On the old stone battlements, swallows were gathering in perfect lines, their wings tucked in, their eyes watching the sky as if waiting for some silent signal to begin their long journey south. The season was turning. Lyrazel had given her word. She would honor the Freer's sacred customs, just like the quiet, bell-fearing people of the valley below. Her voice had been soft but sure when she promised. And in that moment, something fragile and bright stirred in Alveric's heart. A flicker of hope, late but not yet lost, whispering that maybe, just maybe, everything could still be okay. For a time she held on to the Freer's teachings, replaying his words in her mind, remembering the purpose behind every object, every symbol. She tried to understand the meanings that didn't belong to her world. And for several days she did. She remembered. One quiet evening, as she left the nursery later than usual, Lyrazel wandered alone through the castle halls. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone floors, and the last light of the day spilled through the tall, arched windows, painting golden bars across the walls. She paused at one of the windows, gazing out toward the fading sky where the stars were just beginning to blink into view. She remembered, she mustn't pray to them. That rule still echoed in her mind. So instead, she tried to turn her thoughts to the sacred things of the Freer, the candle, the bowl, the silver snuffer, the book resting on its eagle. But it wasn't easy. No matter how she tried, those objects felt distant to her, strange and quiet, like a language she could hear but not speak. She clutched at the memory of their meaning, of what she had been told, hoping it might somehow settle into her soul like truth. Out across the rooftops, the swallows sat in tidy rows, restless, ready to leave. She knew it would be any hour now, and always when they left, something in her changed. like a door closing or a season passing within her heart. She feared that once they were gone, she might forget everything, that the meaning of those holy things might fade like a dream and never come back again. So once again, she stepped quietly into the night, her silver gown brushing over the tall grass, soft as whispers. The wind was still, the air cool against her skin, and above her, the stars shimmered silently, but she kept her eyes low, turning her face away, as if their gaze might betray her heart. She walked toward a slender brook she had come to know well, where the water ran gently over smooth stones. By daylight, those pebbles gleamed with earthy colors, warm reds and soft purples glowing beneath the ripples like treasure. But now, under the cloak of night, they looked dark, almost asleep. She knelt beside the water and reached in with careful hands, feeling for the familiar shapes. One by one, she pulled the flat stones from their resting place, their surfaces cool and comforting. She laid them gently in the meadow beside her, arranging them like memories laid out in a line. These stones, these quiet, ancient stones, stirred something in her. There was a stillness to them that reminded her of home. Not this place of rigid customs and unfamiliar faith, but Elfland, where the rocks hummed with old magic and the land itself spoke in dreams. And though she did not speak it aloud, her soul quietly whispered its longing. She gently laid the stones in a careful row in the middle of the meadow, each one placed with purpose, with silent reverence. "This one will be the candlestick," she whispered to herself. "This one the bell, and that one shall be the holy bowl." A soft breeze stirred the grass around her, but she sat still, her silver blonde hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. "If I can learn to worship these beautiful stones with true feeling," she said quietly, maybe I'll know how to honor the freer sacred things too." Then she knelt in the soft grass, her hands gently folded, and bowed her head before the 4 smooth stones. Her voice rose in a low murmur. Sweet, strange prayers filled with longing, offered to these simple symbols. Her words were sincere, though shaped by a soul from a world far removed from this one. Far off, across the field, Alveric moved through the quiet night, searching. His steps were quick, but his thoughts raced faster. What strange new notion had drawn her from the castle this time? And then he saw her, kneeling alone in the moonlit meadow, her face serene, her voice carrying softly through the stillness. He stepped closer and saw the stones, the 4 flat pebbles laid out before her, honored like holy relics. Horror crept into his eyes. "To kneel to stones in a field," he muttered. "What could be darker than this? Even the old ways of heathens weren't worse." Startled, she looked up at him, not ashamed, only confused. "But I'm learning," she said earnestly, "learning how to worship the freer sacred things." He shook his head slowly, the distance between them growing deeper than silence. "No," he said coldly, "this is not worship. This is the art of the heathen." In the Valley of Earl, there was one fear greater than all others, the shadowy dread of the heathen ways. No one truly knew what those ways were, only that they were whispered of in fear, called dark and dangerous. And so, anything that even looked unfamiliar, that even felt different, was quickly cast into that shadow. When Alveric saw her bowed before the stones, something ancient and fearful stirred in him, not understanding, but judgment. And with that fear came anger, sharp and sudden, the kind of anger men in Earl always wore like armor when speaking of the unknown. "You're playing with the ways of the heathen," he said, his voice hard, cutting through the night like cold iron. His words struck her like a blow to the chest. She stared at him, stunned. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had only wanted to understand. She had only tried to honor what he held sacred. Slowly, gently, in her own way, she had been learning, not for herself, but for him. And still, he had looked at her as if she were a stranger, a danger. Her heart ached. She had knelt there in love, and he had answered in fear. And Alveric, standing there in the fading twilight, held back the words he should have said. The gentle ones, the healing ones, the ones that could have softened her sorrow. But pride stood tall within him. He believed, wrongly, that no man should bend when it came to things he called heathen, as if kindness could somehow taint the truth. So Lyrazel turned silently away, her eyes heavy with unshed tears, and walked slowly back to her lonely tower. Her white dress brushed the grasses, her steps light as a dream, and yet weighed down by a sadness she couldn't name. She didn't look back. Behind her, Alveric stood brooding under the open sky. With a cold frown and a stiff heart, he picked up the 4 flat stones, the ones she had so tenderly chosen, and flung them far across the meadow, as though casting away a sin. They landed in silence and were gone from sight. And then the swallows left. The skies turned colder, and the golden warmth of summer faded into restless winds. Days passed, gray and hollow, filled with silence and words left unsaid. One morning, under a sky so bright it hurt the eyes, with the poplars glowing gold and the aspens burning red like embers, Alveric came to her again. He told her once more that she must worship the sacred things of the friar. But Lyrazel looked at him blankly. She had forgotten, completely. The names, the meanings, the symbols, all of it. And when he saw that, he spoke again of the dark arts she had touched, the ways of the heathen. The light in her eyes dimmed a little more, and the wind moved through the golden leaves, whispering things neither of them would say. Lyrazel walked slowly to her tower as the crisp morning light poured in, soft and golden like liquid glass. She opened the old casket that shimmered in the quiet glow of autumn, its delicate carvings catching the sun like whispers from another world. Inside, nestled like a secret, lay the rune, the enchanted scroll from the King of Elfland. She held it tightly in her hand. Without a word, she crossed the vast, echoing hall, her footsteps light upon the stone floor, the rune clutched close to her chest. Her long gown whispered against the marble as she climbed another spiral staircase, the one that led to the nursery. There she stayed all day with her son. She laughed and played with him, truly laughed at times, spinning toys across the wooden floor, telling him stories, tickling his tiny feet. But now and then, the laughter would fade, and a stillness would fall over her, a faraway look, like the hush before twilight. In those moments, her eyes seemed to gaze beyond the walls into a place no one else could see. Zerundarel, the old wise woman who watched from a shadowed corner, noticed the strange calm in Lyrazel's gaze. She said nothing, but her wrinkled hands paused in their work. For all her years and spells and secrets, even she could only guess what was coming. Evening fell. The sun dipped low behind the hills, its light turning the nursery gold, then dusky rose. Lyrazel tucked her child gently into bed, brushing his hair from his brow with trembling fingers. Then she sat beside him in the dim light and spoke in a soft voice, telling stories. Sweet, simple tales filled with stars and silver birds and skies that never ended. Zerundarel listened quietly, not interrupting. She had seen much in her long life, but even she did not know how to stop what was quietly unfolding. Just before the sun slipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the nursery floor, Lyrazel leaned down and gently kissed her sleeping son on the forehead. Then with hesitant fingers, she unrolled the scroll of the Elf King. It hadn't been a grand decision, nor some carefully made plan. It was a flicker of mood, a passing restlessness, a quiet defiance that had made her lift the scroll from its velvet-lined box that morning. And perhaps, had the mood faded, she might have returned it untouched, back into its ancient place. But now, it was already in her hand, and something about the weight of it, the feel of the ancient parchment, the memory of her father's magic, the faint shimmer of old enchantment, it pulled at her. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe loneliness, maybe just a strange, wild longing that had no name. With a soft sigh, she let her eyes drift down to the curling black symbols inked in Elfland's language. Characters dark as midnight, twisting and beautiful like the shadows of stars. And as she read, something began to stir, quiet and powerful, deep within her. And whatever ancient magic was woven into that rune, the kind too deep and dangerous to fully name, it was wrapped in something even greater, a father's love. The spell pulsed not just with arcane power from the twilight beyond, but with the fierce, unyielding love of the Elf King for his daughter. And as the black, curling symbols glowed faintly in the fading light, they shimmered with both forces, the timeless strength of Elfland's enchantment and the tender ache of a parent's heart. magic and love, the oldest, deepest powers from two different worlds, had been fused into that single scroll. And if only Alveric had truly believed in the power of his love for her, if only he had trusted that simple human truth, perhaps it would have been enough. But the Elf King's rune, born of magic and of love beyond mortal measure, was stronger than the sacred relics of the Freer, stronger even than all the quiet faith in the valley below. The moment Lyrazel's eyes traced the rune on the scroll, a strange wind stirred across unseen borders, a whisper from Elfland awakening old forgotten dreams, and with it, wild fancies began to spill into the world of men. Some were so vivid, so intoxicating, that a city clerk might suddenly push back his chair, leave his reports behind, and dance barefoot along a salt-sprayed shore without knowing why. Others were heavy with longing, powerful enough to make bankers abandon locked vaults and marble counters, walking out into the sunlight, chasing mirages of green hills and the scent of distant heather. There were fancies that could turn an ordinary man into a poet in a heartbeat, while he still sat at his desk, pen in hand, wondering why tears blurred his eyes. These weren't mere daydreams. They were tidal waves of wonder, summoned by the ancient power in the Elf King's spell. Dreams crafted not by mortal minds, but by Elfland itself, wild, irresistible, and brimming with magic. Lyrazel sat quietly, the rune clutched in her hand, as a storm of visions from Elfland swirled around her, wild, beautiful, and utterly overwhelming. She was lost in them, helpless against the flood of shimmering memories and whispering dreams that came rushing across the border, crashing into her fragile human mind. They danced in her thoughts. They sang in forgotten tongues. They called her back with voices made of moonlight and mist. And as they surged stronger, she began to change. Her body felt lighter, as if the weight of the world was slipping away. Her feet barely touched the floor. They hovered softly like shadows on water. Gravity no longer knew what to do with her. The solid earth began to lose its hold. She was becoming something else, something not meant to stay in the world of stone and sorrow. Neither her love for this place nor the love of those who lived in it could hold her anymore. The magic was too deep. The call of Elfland was too strong. And then, the memories returned, like soft waves brushing against the shore of her soul. Visions of her eternal childhood in Elfland came flooding back, crystal clear and achingly beautiful. She remembered the still tarns where the skies of magic never changed, the shadowy edges of deep enchanted forests, and those dream-soaked lawns that shimmered like illusions. And far beyond, the palace, that wondrous palace no mortal voice could describe, a place that only lived in song. She saw them all again, as clearly as one might see delicate shells resting on the floor of a frozen lake, visible beneath the surface of ice, their shapes softened by distance and time. Her memories glowed faintly, like lanterns seen from across the mists of a forgotten world. She could almost hear it, the rustle of tiny elfin creatures in the undergrowth, the laughter of unknown beings hiding in the glow of dusk. Sweet, strange scents drifted through the air, carried by the wind from the radiant flowers that grew in those magic lands. And then, music. Soft, haunting, enchanted melodies began to reach her ears, so faint, so far, yet undeniable. Songs she had once known, voices from the realm of twilight. They floated gently across the border between worlds. Elfland was calling her back, and through it all, cutting through the haze with calm power, came a voice, deep, measured, and filled with old magic. Her father's voice, so close, so near, as though he were standing right beside her, speaking her name across time. She stood up, slowly, as if something invisible had lifted her, and in that instant, Earth lost its hold on her. The pull of the world, that binds us all by gravity and weight and sorrow, slipped away like mist. She was no longer made of flesh and bone, but of stardust and memory, of dreams whispered by twilight, of stories long forgotten. Without a sound, without a second glance, Lyrazel drifted from the room like smoke slipping through the cracks of a door. Zirundurel, the wise witch who had once calmed storms with a word, stood powerless. No spell could bind Lyrazel now. Not even love could turn her head back to see her sleeping child. And just then, from the northwest, the wind rose. It came tumbling through the forest like a wild song, stripping the last golden leaves from the trees, whirling them into the air like dancers set free. The wind swept across the open hills, leading a jubilant parade of scarlet and gold leaves, leaves that had once feared this moment, but now celebrated it with wild, swirling joy. Together, wind and leaves climbed higher and higher into the glowing sky, where the sun had already slipped beyond the horizon, and with them went Lyrazel. Lifted on the breath of the wind, carried by color and wonder, she vanished, a soul returning to the land of dreams. Chapter 10. The Ebbing of Elfland. At dawn, with shadows still clinging to the stones, Alveric climbed the winding stairs to the tower where the witch Zerundarel lived. His eyes were hollow, his face pale with worry. He looked like a man who had walked through a nightmare and hadn't yet woken up. His boots were muddy, cloak torn by thorns, signs of a desperate search that had lasted all night. All through the dark hours, he had hunted for Lyrazel, calling her name into the silence, through forests, across fields, beside moonlit streams. He had stood by the brook where she once knelt to the stones. He had searched near the pool where she whispered prayers to the stars. He had called her name up the cold stone of every tower and shouted it into the open night, only to be answered by the haunting voice of echo. Not a single trace, no broken branch, no voice on the wind, nothing. And so, hopeless and haunted, he came to the only soul left who might understand, the wise witch Zerundarel. "Where?" Alveric asked softly. A single word, no more. He spoke carefully, not wanting his young son to sense the storm of fear rising in his heart. But Orion, even at that age, already understood. He felt it in his father's voice, saw it in his eyes. Zerundarel, standing by the window where golden light spilled across old stone, slowly shook her head. Her voice was quiet, almost like a lullaby lost to time. "She's gone the way of the leaves," she whispered, "the way all beauty eventually goes." But Alveric didn't wait to hear more than that. Her first 5 words struck him like wind to flame, and he was already moving, his boots echoing down the stairs, his cloak trailing like a shadow behind him. He burst into the crisp morning air where the sky was wide and wild with wind. The trees were nearly bare now, only a few fiery leaves clung on. And out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, where the scarlet and gold had danced into the distance, he ran, chasing beauty, chasing hope, trying to follow the path the leaves had taken. A few leaves still clung to the bare, cold branches, stubborn, silent, and slow to let go. But now even they had taken to the wind, drifting one by one into the morning sky. Their golden red dance was lonelier now, trailing far behind the rest, whispering through the air like the final notes of a fading song. And Alveric saw them, those last lingering leaves twirling southeastward toward Elfland. Without a moment's hesitation, he strapped on his enchanted sword, its weight a reminder of old vows and deeper magic. He slung a small pack of provisions across his shoulder and, driven by desperation and hope, set out on foot across the fields. The leaves, glowing like embers of a dying fire, led the way, fading, beautiful, and broken. And Alveric followed them, just as many have followed lost causes wrapped in glory, even in their final moments. He walked into the high meadows where the grass sparkled silver with morning dew. Sunlight lit up the world like it had something to say, but a quiet sorrow floated in the breeze. Even the distant lowing of cattle felt like the earth was sighing. Autumn was fading, and so was something more. The morning was calm and clear, painted in golden light, with a crisp wind from the northwest roaming free across the fields like a restless spirit. But there was no calm in Alveric's heart. He moved with the wild energy of someone who had just lost something irreplaceable, his steps quick, his eyes searching, his breath short with worry. There was no peace in him, only the relentless motion of grief wrapped in hope. All day, he kept his gaze fixed to the southeast, toward the direction the wind and the leaves had taken, where Elfland might lie hidden just beyond the edges of the real world. He scanned the horizon over the rolling hills and wide open sky, waiting for a glimpse of the Elfin Mountains, their pale, unearthly blue, like forget-me-nots pressed in a book of dreams, untouched by any light known to this world. but they never appeared. Still, Alveric pushed forward, restless and unwavering, chasing a fading vision through the bright air of morning into the fading light of evening, chasing something he could feel in his soul but could no longer see with his eyes. And then, in the quiet hush of the fading afternoon, Alveric spotted it. The old leatherworker's cottage, its roof bowed slightly with time, the chimney leaning like a tired memory. It was the same place where, years ago, the scabbard for his magical sword had been crafted. The sight of it hit him like a breath from the past, stirring something deep within, an echo of that long-ago evening when he had first stood before its crooked door. He didn't know how many years had passed since then. How could he? Time flowed differently in Elfland, slipping through fingers like dream sand. It could have been decades or mere moments, and yet the world here had aged while his heart still carried the weight of a single, endless loss. Instinctively, his eyes turned toward the sky beyond the house, searching for the pale blue ridges of the Elfin Mountains. He remembered exactly where they should be, just past the sloping edge of the leatherworker's gable, lined up like silent sentinels in a land of twilight and wonder. But there was nothing there. No shimmer, no outline, no trace of the mountains, only open sky, empty and indifferent. With a quiet breath, Alveric stepped inside the old cottage. And there, as if not a day had passed, sat the leatherworker, aged, yes, but still there, working with the same slow precision, his hands moving across worn leather like time had never touched him at all. The leatherworker was beautifully aged, his skin like wrinkled parchment, and his movements slow but certain, crafted by years, like the fine lines of his work. Even the table he sat at looked older than memory itself, worn smooth by a lifetime of quiet labor. He looked up and smiled faintly, recognition flickering in his cloudy eyes. "Alveric," he said softly, as if greeting a ghost. Alveric nodded, a little breathless, half in the present, half in a dream of years gone by. "And your wife?" he asked gently, though something in him already feared the answer. The old man lowered his eyes. "She passed a long time ago." Those simple words struck Alveric with more force than he expected. Time had slipped past him like water through cupped hands, and now he stood in a world reshaped by the years he couldn't count. Years that had somehow folded away while he chased the fading light of Elfland. He muttered a few quiet words, formal, respectful. Condolences that came too late, spoken with the awkward distance of someone who hadn't been there when grief arrived. Then, after a pause thick with silence, he looked past the old man out through the weathered window. "Where are they?" he asked, voice suddenly sharper. "The Elfin Mountains, the pale blue peaks I once saw from this place?" His eyes searched the horizon, but there was only wind and sky. No hint of the otherworldly mountains that once shimmered like a dream just beyond reach. A strange expression slowly spread across the old man's face, like mist rolling in over a forgotten landscape. It was as if he'd never seen the mountains Alveric spoke of, as if those pale blue peaks were nothing more than a dream from someone else's lifetime. "I don't know," the leatherworker said at last, his voice low, almost uncertain. There was no lie in his eyes, just the silence of one who had never dared to look too far beyond what the world allowed him to see. And Alveric, though tired and hollow with hunger, felt a familiar frustration rise in him, the same refusal after all these years. This old man, unchanged by time, still would not speak of Elfland. But it didn't matter anymore. The boundary was close. Alveric remembered this place, the field just beyond the house, where the edge of reality blurred, where the veil of twilight shimmered and parted. If the mountains would no longer show themselves, then he would step into that half-light again and ask the creatures of Elfland to guide him. The old man offered food, his hand kind but trembling. "You've walked far," he said softly. Alveric shook his head. "No time. Just one more question. One last hope." "Elfland, do you remember anything? Anything at all?" But the leatherworker only looked down and said quietly, "Of such things I know nothing." Alveric didn't wait for more. He turned and strode out the door, boots crunching on brittle leaves, heart pounding. He crossed the narrow yard and stepped into the field where day met dusk, where the world softened into legend. There, where twilight hung like breath on glass, he walked forward, chasing a memory, chasing a dream. The moment Alveric stepped into the field, he noticed something strange. Every toadstool bent in the same direction, as though bowing toward something unseen. And not just the toadstools, even the foxgloves, the tall mulleins, and rare wild orchids all leaned gently southeast, toward where Elfland once breathed against the world. Just as thorn trees always bend away from the sea, the plants touched by enchantment reach toward magic. It was nature's subtle whisper, Elfland is near. He didn't need to hear waves or feel any strange breeze. The signs were already around him. Mystery had its own gravity. Above, golden birds wheeled and dipped in the sky, radiant creatures not born of this world. Alveric watched them in awe and knew at once a storm must have stirred in Elfland, sending its birds tumbling across the border into the realm of men. For even though a northwest wind stirred the grasses at his feet, the birds flew from the southeast, from the lands of twilight and wonder. He pressed on, his heart quickening. But when his boots touched the far edge of the field, there was nothing. No shimmer of twilight, no soft glow of boundary, no Elfland. He crossed the entire field, just grass, just silence. And when he reached the end, he was still standing in the ordinary world. The path was gone, the border had vanished, and the fells of Elfland were nowhere to be seen. With the cold northwest wind pushing at his back, Alveric moved forward, faster now, more restless, more desperate. The land beneath his feet began to change. Gone were the wildflowers and the familiar whispers of trees. The earth turned pale and barren, covered in dry stone and lifeless dust. No shade, no scent, no memory remained. It was a place where nothing bloomed, nothing sang. A land emptied of wonder, where even nostalgia could not take root. This was not the world he remembered, nor the one he hoped to find. Above him, he caught a glimpse of a golden bird streaking through the sky, flying swift and sure toward the southeast, toward Elfland. His heart surged. There, surely just beyond that horizon, just behind some unseen veil of magic, the Elfin Mountains waited, hidden perhaps by a spell of mist or time. Without hesitation, he followed the bird, eyes searching the distance, hoping, aching, to catch a glimpse of the pale blue peaks of Elfland once again. But the land ahead stayed gray, and the mist did not part. The autumn sky remained bright, clean, untouched by cloud or shadow. The entire horizon stretched wide and open before him, but nowhere did the pale shimmer of the Elfin Mountains appear. Still, Alveric did not yet understand what had truly happened. It wasn't until he saw it, standing alone on that barren stony plain, a single May tree in full bloom. White flowers danced in the wind, untouched by the season around it. And in that moment, he remembered it. That very tree, blooming once in a far-off springtime of his childhood, when joy came easy and magic felt near. And then he knew. Elfland had once touched this place. It had reached across the border and left its magic behind. And now it had drawn back. Quietly, mysteriously, like the sea slipping from the shore in the dead of night. He couldn't tell how far it had gone, but he knew its touch had been real. For just as dreams and wonder often enter our world, through half-remembered stories, glowing sunsets, or the forgotten songs of childhood, so too do our lost memories, our cherished little things, drift back into Elfland. Old toys, faded laughter, the way someone once said your name, all find their way across the boundary, becoming part of Elfland's eternal story. This is the ancient rhythm of all things, a give and take, an ebb and flow. Just as trees once gave light to the stars and became forests of coal, and coal returns that light again. Just as rivers fill the sea, and the sea returns to the rivers, so too does everything return what it receives, even life, even death. As Alveric walked across the dry, silent land, something caught his eye lying still on the dusty ground. He stepped closer, and his breath caught. It was a toy, not just any toy, his toy. A tiny wooden figure, clumsily carved, rough at the edges. A treasure of his childhood. He remembered it so clearly. The joy it once brought him, the wild adventures he imagined with it, the heartbreak the day it broke, and the quiet sorrow when he'd thrown it away. Yet here it was, not broken, not faded, but glowing. It shimmered with a quiet light, as though it had been touched by dreams. The toy looked just as he once believed it to be, not as it ever really was. It was no longer crude or simple. It had become the magical thing he'd seen with the eyes of childhood, transformed by time, memory, and the enchantment of Elfland. And now it lay abandoned here, like the treasures of the deep sea sometimes found stranded and forgotten on empty shores, while the ocean that once held them rolls far away in the distance, a line of blue on the edge of the world. Alveric stared in silence, heart aching with wonder and loss. He knew Elfland had truly gone, but it had left something behind. The land before him stretched dull and silent, a plain once touched by wonder, now emptied of its magic. Elfland was gone, and yet, not completely. Scattered across the withered earth, Alveric kept finding forgotten pieces of his childhood, tiny relics of joy, innocence, and old dreams, toys, ribbons, pebbles, and memories, things lost so long ago that he hadn't even realized they were missing. Somehow they had slipped through time, drawn into the timeless world of Elfland, where all forgotten wonders gathered and glowed. But now they were back, abandoned, faded, left behind like sparks after a fire has died. And in the air, so faint it almost wasn't there, drifted the echoes of old lullabies, familiar tunes from nursery rooms and distant voices calling his name the way only someone who loves you calls it. They whispered around him, softer, slower, fading, like they didn't belong to this world anymore, like they couldn't survive without the magic that had cradled them. The plane felt heavier now, empty not of things but of meaning. Elfland had truly retreated, and it had taken wonder with it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the eastern sky bloomed with a soft mauve-rose light, too rich, too surreal to truly belong to Earth. Alveric stared at it, heart quickening with fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, it was the distant reflection of Elfland's glow, bouncing across the sky like a memory trying to find its way back. So he walked on, horizon after endless horizon, chasing that fading light, believing it would finally lead him to the lost land of magic. But night came instead, deep and vast, with the quiet company of Earth's own stars above. And at last, the restless drive that had haunted him all day wore itself out. Exhausted, he wrapped his cloak tightly around him, sat beneath the open sky, and ate what little food remained in his satchel. Then he lay back on the cold earth, surrounded by shadows and forgotten things, and fell into a troubled sleep. The kind that never really rests, filled with dreams that ache instead of comfort. At the first pale breath of dawn, long before any light could be seen, he awoke, his impatience sharper than sleep. A thick October mist wrapped the land in silence, hiding every trace of morning. He finished the last bite of his food and, without hesitation, stepped forward into the cold gray unknown, still searching, still hoping. Now, not even the familiar sounds of the world he knew followed him. No echo of human life, no crowing rooster from a distant village, no voice or footstep of men, only silence. For when Elfland had been here, no one ever dared walk this path, and now that it had slipped away, only Alveric remained to cross this forsaken plain. He had wandered far beyond the reach of hearth and home, far from the warmth of human voices. Around him stretched a strange stillness, unnatural, unsettling. Only once in a while a whisper of sound brushed the air, the faint fading cries of forgotten songs left behind by Elfland's retreat. They were weaker now than even yesterday, ghosts of melodies barely clinging to the breeze. And then dawn came. Low on the horizon in the southeast, the sky flared with a breathtaking green glow, too rich and haunting to be of this earth. Alveric's heart lifted. Surely, this time he had found the edge of Elfland. Surely that emerald shimmer was its reflection spilling across the sky. He pushed forward, breath caught in his chest, eyes locked on the horizon. But when he crested the next rise, only more of the same. The same gray, lifeless stones, the same flat, silent land. And still not a single glimpse of the pale blue peaks of the Elfin Mountains. Was Elfland always just one horizon ahead, forever glowing faintly in the clouds, only to slip further away each time he came close? Or had it vanished years ago, long before he even began his search? Alveric could not tell. But still he walked, driven by the hope that it might still be waiting just beyond the next ridge. Eventually he reached a dry, barren rise, one he had fixed his hopes upon for so long. With aching legs and a heart still full of longing, he climbed it and looked out across the vast flat land beyond. But there was nothing, no shimmer, no mountain, not even the faintest outline of the pale blue peaks. The few magical fragments that Elfland had left behind, those little memories, those childhood treasures, had begun to fade too. They now seemed like ordinary things, stripped of wonder, dull beneath the weight of time. With heavy breath, Alveric drew his magical sword, the very blade that had once cut through enchantments. Its edge still gleamed with power. But magic, once lost, cannot be summoned by steel alone. This sword could break a spell, but it could not bring the dream back. And so the land stayed still, gray, empty, utterly mundane. He pressed on a little farther, unwilling to surrender just yet, but the horizon shifted with every step like a cruel mirage. And no matter how far he walked, the elfin mountains never appeared. Then it struck him, not like thunder, but like the slow ache of a truth too long denied. He had lost Elfland, and nothing, not sword, nor will, nor longing, could bring it back.